Well, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have another fantastic guest, and fun enough for me, it's a fellow Army veteran by the name of Joe Troutman. He's also the author of a fantastic new book called Gods of War, The Legend of Blackhawk Company, 1st of the 23rd Infantry. Joe, just for fun, since this is the Lima Charlie show, I'd like to start with a little radio check. How do you read me over?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So yeah, let's get right into it because I'm fascinated by the book. It's a great read. I'm gonna make sure we have a link out there so folks can pick up a couple copies. Great history to share with neighbors, friends, colleagues, kids. But let's go back a little bit in time before that happened, and let's talk about, thank God we're still in a society of a volunteer army. What was the circumstances? Why did you choose to join, and specifically the branch and the job you wound up in, the MLS? How did that all come about for you?
So when I was in high school, I was an all-state athlete, but I did not do well in school, so my grades were not good enough to go to college. So I didn't have a lot of options. I was working at a restaurant, and one day I decided that I was going to join the army just to get out of town and do something different. I actually joined the National Guard first. I was going to be an
Awesome.
MP in the National Guard, but on my way to leave to go to basic training, I got a speeding ticket. And
Oh,
they told me that I had to wait 6 months until the ticket cleared. And yeah, so I had no place to live. I had no job. I'm standing in the recruiter's office. I walk across the hall to the army, and I was like, "Hey, I'm ready to go. I need something I can get. I can go to basic training now." And they were like, "Hey, we got 4 MOSs for you. You could be a fueler, you could be an 11 Bravo, you could be a 13 Fox." I was like, "What's the 13 Fox?" And they showed me the video of stuff blowing up. I was like, "That's a job for me." And I left. They put me in a hotel for the night, and I left the next day to go to basic training at Fort Sill.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So now for our listening audience that doesn't know MLSs like we do is fun. Explain that job a little bit and what that training entailed for you.
Okay, so 13 Fox is a forward observer. So you're basically the link between the field artillery and the maneuver units like tanks, Bradleys, 11 Bravos, infantry. And your job is to advise them on everything fire support from, indirect fire, mortars, and artillery to, close air support and attack aviation. And you're supposed to provide the expertise to be able to make that all fit in. The training is about 8 weeks at Fort Sill, and they don't teach you anything basically except the basics, and then you figure everything else out as you go.
And they're very patient with you, and they're very kind, and they give you safe spaces and teddy bears when you're having a rough day. I understand that's how that works usually down there.
1996.
Yeah, same. I was a 90s. We were in the tail end of like where things were actually a little bit more disciplined approach to the training.
Well, and that was pre 9/11.
Right?
Pre 9/11 Army was a lot different than the everything that came afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's cool. Okay, so you got through the training, and then I know from the book, obviously, and you were in Fort Hood for a while, which I spent some time there with training myself, but walk our listeners through some of the travels and some of the we'll say the frequent flyer miles you racked up there.
So when I graduated from basic training in AIT, I went to Korea first. My first duty station was Korea. I was with the 503rd Infantry over in Korea. I did a year in Korea. I went to 1st Cavalry Division, spent 4 years down at Fort Hood. And then I got reassigned to Fort Lewis to the Stryker Brigade. That's BCO 123. That's the unit from the book. I spent about 4 years there. Um, then went back to Fort Hood to 3rd ACR. Was an instructor, 13 Fox instructor at Fort Sill. And then my final duty assignment was back at 3rd Brigade in 520 Infantry. I went to Iraq twice and Afghanistan twice.
Racked up the Sandals Resort flyer miles there for sure. Yeah. Frequent frequent visitor, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, a couple tours. Those are some hectic years, and the rotation of vets, and I know you're active duty, but I'm sure you saw a lot of National Guard there as well, because that was a majority of the forces. And it wasn't just a one tour thing anymore. It's go, come back, adjust, go, come back, adjust. So
Oh,
it must have been chaotic.
the op tempo never slowed down, so you never really got a chance to reset.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, twice I got sent home after. I mean, I we got back from the deployment. I went to a new unit and deployed with them right away. So They
Yeah.
tell you got boots on the ground, but the unit gets the boots on the ground, but you don't because they
Yeah.
sent me to another unit and I deployed.
It's like a hot cat type of situation there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, three tours is intense. And what was the year's time span of that between first and the third deployment?
First deployment was 2003, 2004, like late 2003 to 2004. The last one was 2012. So I
Wow.
came back like October of 2012. And I had to have spinal surgery when I came back, so that's what ended my career. I
Oh,
woke up
geez.
paralyzed from the waist down. So yeah, that was
Wow.
pretty fun.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, thank God you got through the surgery, but that's intense. So okay, so that obviously led to the separation from the military. What was that like for you? How was the nobody really, and we talked about this with we have a mutual friend, of course, and we'll talk about him whenever you want, but um we we often talk about even when you're in the service, let's say even 20 years, a lot of us don't really have a plan per se of how we get out. And yours seemed very sudden. So I know that was abrupt, but once the news broke and you accepted the fact that that was going to happen, what was that path for you? What was your next steps that you were thinking about taking?
It was very hard. I'm not gonna lie. Like to end so fast. I thought I would have a couple more years of planning, do a couple more things. I mean, after the surgery, I was in pain all the time. I didn't have the army anymore, so I went from being this combat leader, this focal point, a platoon sergeant for multiple years, to basically laying in my bed because I couldn't do anything for years. So I mean, it was a difficult transition to find my place in the world again and what I wanted to do because physically I couldn't do much. Mentally my mind was kind of, frayed because I had no purpose in life.
Right.
So it took me about 7 years really to find my niche in life. And then I started to write this book and connect with veterans and connect with the guys that were in the unit. And, our friend Rob Robinson,
Yep.
he is actually the commander of the book. He's
Yeah.
the commander in the book. So,
And I wrote the night he had a nice forward I read that he did for you as well. So that's fantastic.
He's he's a great guy and he's very encouraging. Now, the thing about this is the guys in the unit, we've all kept in touch pretty close. So we're all very close. So when I started interviewing people for the book, they they were very skeptical at first about someone writing about our story because they wanted it told right, and a lot of guys don't like to talk about some of the things that we went through. I mean, that's
Sure.
just part of our generation of war fighters is, we bear the brunt of everything and we don't talk about it.
Right.
So I had to get these guys to open up. It took months and multiple calls back and forth before dudes would finally be like, "Hey." And then I started posting some of the stuff that I was writing, and a lot of the guys are like, "Man, this is really good. Okay, you know what? I'm on board for this. So let's get this done. I'm going to help you out here." And then like the last month before I'm about to publish, everybody came out of the woodworks and everybody wanted to add their story. And
Right.
they were like, "Oh my gosh, let me tell you." And my phone was blowing up. My wife's going crazy. Like, "You're always on the phone." I'm like, "I don't know what to tell you. Nobody wanted to talk to me a year ago. Now everybody wants to talk to me." So, I mean, I did a last second revision, like right before publishing day, adding in about 3 different stories of really good
Yeah.
stories of people that gave me their information right before the publishing date. So,
Yeah. Well, that's good. You could adjust to that and to include them as much as you could. That's great. Mhm. Yeah. So let's give our listeners a little bit of an overview of the book because I'm privy to it because it's like I said, it's a great read. There's a link online, folks. You just pick up a couple copies a day. But give our listeners a little bit of an overview. No big spoilers, but just give them a
so
sense of the book and what they can expect to learn from it.
So the book follows our unit, Blackhawk Company 123 Infantry, from transformation as the Army's first Striker Brigade. So 123 was actually the first unit selected to transform into the Striker Brigade. We do the whole, it covers the whole train up, everything that happened, all the training beforehand. We were part of the only unit to ever go to NTC and JRTC back to back. It's never happened before, and we're the
Huh.
only unit that ever did it.
Yeah.
And then our combat deployment. We drove our strikers from Kuwait all the way. over God's green earth pretty much, and then finally ended up in Mosul, and we relieved the 101st Division. And then Blackhawk Company 123 Infantry held down Western Mosul almost single-handedly for 9 months. And we got in some good battles, including the Battle of August 4th, which is the pretty much the longest and largest company-sized firefight of the entire war in Iraq.
Yep.
Um, 10 plus hours out in the city getting shellacked by the enemy. So that was pretty fun. And then it covers a little bit of the post, like reintegration back after war. It gets a little bit into that, and that's the basic story. I mean, it's a story of brotherhood. It's a story of family. You know, like I told Rob, I thought I was going to write a story about war, and it turned into so much more because there's so much more that makes the unit, the legend of Blackhawk Company 123 was the family atmosphere, the fact that we took care of each other. I mean, we lost 3 dudes on our very first combat mission that we ever went on, and after that, we all got together, and basically there was this quiet resolve that we weren't losing anybody else. No matter what it took, we weren't going to lose anybody else, and that's kind of what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough to the first time. I mean, I was over in Iraq myself with the 69th Infantry, and that was God, that was '04. Stayed through September of '05. And yeah, the first time you don't, you have that initial anxiety. Like, I don't know about your route, but like we left from Camp Beering to, I think we went to Liberty first, something like that, and then we bounced to Taji. So you have your thought process of like, when's something going to happen, right? You're waiting for that first, not that you want it, but you're anticipating what that was going to be like. And but to have your first firefight and then casualties, that just
It
sets.
wasn't even a firefight. That's the crazy part.
Mm.
There was a rollover accident where the
Oh,
strikers
geez.
rolled over and the guys, it went into a drainage canal, and yeah, so it was the first combat mission, but there was no actual enemy contact.
Mm.
That's what made it that much tougher.
Yeah, terrific. But it's and then it just sets everyone's mind changes. Whatever we always thought is, whether it be basic training trainees, advanced trainees, NCO leadership, whatever you had prior to, as we used to say, going to the sandbox, everything you thought you would do and respond to, everything just kind of flips. And then ironically, everybody's on the same page without even realizing it. It's just like an instant. It's like you all have your PhD right away, and now you understand the risk and situation clearly.
Well, I mean, for parts of it, I mean, we were fighting more than just the enemy over there, because there's a lot of people. I mean, if you weren't outside of in the striker brigade, you don't really understand this. There's a lot of people that wanted the striker brigade shut down.
Yeah,
Like it was almost shut down a couple of different times. One of the reasons we had to go to JRTC again was because they weren't sure we were going to be able to deploy and do the things that they said that we were going to do, and they spent billions of dollars on these vehicles. So that's why we ended up down at JRTC. And then during the deployment, it was Blackhawk Company pretty much against everybody else, because we ended up, by circumstance and because of the nature of what our mission was and where we were, we ended up doing all the stuff basically. And there was a lot of animosity towards our company. A lot of people thought we were a little out of control. I mean, there's a lot of different factors that went into that made it so much more than just the combat deployment that we had to deal with.
yeah, a lot of DOD from overseas. I used to say one of the frustrations I had over there was, it seemed a lot of people in uniform are being led by a lot of people in suits and dresses that have never spent any time over here. That was a big problem. We were part of a unit that was getting downgraded quite a bit. We lost our 50 cals one day, which was like, what? What? So, there's a lot of that was happening back then. And, again, this isn't a political show, but the fact of the matter was, you know, the years that you're over there, depending what's going on. Like, I was there during a US election, right?
Yeah.
So you have people running campaigns back home trying to either get elected or get reelected. That definitely has an influence on how things are overseas, and it shouldn't be. The military should be left alone to do what the military is trained to do. So I totally understand your take on that with the Stryker Brigade. And I was in Camp Stryker for like a 5-minute stint there at the end. Yeah. We were out processing. We did a few of our I think like our last patrols and things were out of that camp on the way out. So yeah, that's a fascinating. Like I said, it's a fascinating story that you laid out here for you. So you okay? So you did all the interviews with your fellow veterans. Did you have any big resistance? Like I don't know how you got this published. Did you have anyone that like tried to talk you into doing it a little bit differently? Was there any type of? I'm always interested in the writing process. So
So, like, I've never written anything before in my life. Um, I wasn't sure what to expect, and the writing evolved. I mean, the writing at the beginning wasn't great, and then it evolved, and some of the later things that I wrote were, I mean, it's pretty good. Um, there wasn't a lot of resistance. Every time I published, every time I would keep the guys involved, and especially if I'm going to use their names and their stuff, and I'd send them the this is this chapter, and most of them were like, oh my god, this is amazing, like I
right,
can't believe you're telling our story. And yeah, like there wasn't a lot of resistance. There was one dude who wouldn't let me use his name in the book, so I had to change his name.
sure.
So other than that, though, everybody else was like, "Go forward, this is great."
Yeah, and that's fine. That's totally respectful. We had a company commander that wrote a book about our unit as well, and same deal. There's a few names that are changed and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of fun for me because when I read it, I know exactly who everybody is.
But
But
that's the
that's
thing
fine
too. The
because that's
the
and that's
guys are going to
totally
know.
that's totally fine. That's how they should be, to each their own there. But yeah, so that's great. And then so I bet you, and I know a little bit about the writing process, little bit, but I would assume this was all consuming not just the phone calls to get the information, but then the actual writing and the editing, and then you're second guessing a few things. I mean, this must have been like your obsessive. I would think this went on for quite a while.
It took me about a year.
Yeah,
The whole process, the actual writing portion was December to June, so about 6 months to write everything. Once I did the research, and some of it was researching on the fly. Like I said, taking phone calls after the fact, and you have to go back and rewrite stuff. But there's a lot of second guessing. I mean, I would read stuff and I'd be like, "That's just not very good." So let's see what we can do to change this. But then, like when you're writing about battles, like there's so much going on in a battle that I mean, on the ground as a platoon sergeant, I only knew what my platoon was doing. I had no clue what the other platoons were doing.
right.
So you have to try to fit it all together and make it so that it's readable and that it meshes and that it kind of flows through the whole thing. So that was a difficult challenge as well. Just trying to match everything up. And then you don't want to. What I didn't want was for I've read some books of where it skips around and you get lost in the process when you read something and then it's like, oh my gosh, well, how is it June and then it's July? Is it August? Is it September? Like
Right.
that was one of the focal points I wanted to do to make the whole thing just go from start to finish
Yeah.
and not jump around and skip around.
Yeah. Well, you did a great job with it. It's tough to do, and I totally get what you're saying about different viewpoints of the same events. I can remember I got married after the war, and I, I had a luck. I was fortunate enough that a lot of the guys I was overseas with came to my wedding. It was really nice. And I remember looking at them during the wedding reception. I'm thinking, I told my best man, my best friend, I was like, "You got two tables full of guys there that just spent the same amount of time in the same place, essentially doing the same job, but we all experienced a whole different year. Like it wasn't a year and a half. It was 15, 16 years, because we all had our own view and our own memories. And I journal and write myself just for my own use. I'm sure that when you were writing this, I'm sure on the one hand it was emotionally draining on some level, but I'm sure it also helped you kind of process your own memory. I find
It,
that with myself that when I'm writing things down verbatim the way it happened, you have emotions that attach to facts, right? And sometimes the timeline's off. It's like, wait a minute, how could that have happened that day? No, 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 no. I think it actually happened this way. You talk to someone else and you get corrected. You're like, oh yeah, that was a week before that.
well,
I'm sure you
and I
experienced some of that while writing the
I will
book.
tell you that writing this book healed me in
Yeah,
so many ways that I can't even describe.
it's
But
therapeutic to go
in
through.
addition to that, talking to the soldiers,
Yeah,
it's helped with their healing process as well because it got some of the I mean, we don't want we as veterans, especially warfighter veterans, we don't talk. We don't talk. We hold it in. We're tough, especially infantry dudes. We're tough guys, and we're gonna hold it in. But talking with those guys, and they get that stuff out, and you know what I mean, like that helps with the healing. Like I said, it healed me so much, like emotional healing that I never thought was going to happen. But it's one of the greatest. I mean, if the book never sells one copy, that's one of the greatest things that ever came out of it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to know that you got that experience of it. And I find that that's true with a lot of people. That's why they say, a lot of these folks that are clinical, because I've interviewed some people on the show that are into mental health and things like that. And a lot of the experts will tell you just journaling, just writing things down, reminding yourself of how things started and ended helps you mentally, not necessarily resolve, but acknowledge, it's like taking a box off of a shelf. Like take the box out, open it up, go through the files in order. And then if you have to put it back on the shelf, that's fine, but at least you know what's in there. You understand it. Otherwise, it's all cluttered and you have this angst and stress because you're not sorting out the details. And I'm glad that you got that experience out of that because a lot of authors do say the same thing. It's a healing process. So, and I'm sure that the guys that you discussed in the book, I'm sure they're getting the same thing now that they're reading the book and piecing it together. It just kind of it helps you comprehend a little bit better what we all went through.
It's a slow process for some of the. I mean, almost everybody I know, they did multiple deployments.
Mhm.
I mean, and so the second tour was rough for some of those dudes that were there.
Yeah.
There's a lot that happened, and there was a lot of injuries. So some of those guys are still processing, combat injuries from the second tour. The trauma associated with 3, 4, 5, 6 deployments that some of these guys are dealing with. I mean, like I said, when you're always on the go and you never have a reset, some of the World War II veterans or the Korean War veterans and the Vietnam War veterans, they went over there, they did their tour, they came back and they got out and they didn't have to do anything else.
Right.
Where our generation, we didn't get out.
Yeah.
We just kept going back because the war never ended.
Yeah.
Then we never had that chance to reset. We never had that chance to reintegrate into society, and you never have a chance to set your mind again because you're so focused on the next mission. You're going back over there that you just shove everything aside.
Yeah. And plus the
And that's when
collateral
you
damage
struggle to get out.
beyond the service member, you got their families being impacted in the same way. You have a family that has an absent parent for, whatever months or a year or more. They come home, maybe they're only home 6, 9 months, and then they're gone again. It's almost impossible, if soldiers who are trained to deal with this on some level, I mean, there's a lot of things lacking in training, but on some level, we were kind of primed up to expect this type of shift when you get back home. There's a period of time there where you have to adjust. We kind of knew that, and we take that on, like you said, that's our job. Okay, but it's not my kid's job. It's not my wife's job. So there's this collateral impact there where, yeah, again, I mean, there's so many examples I can think of without naming names where there's just it's a cycle of trauma that's kind of spread around the house and it goes beyond your house, right? What if you had a civilian job or maybe you're trying to finish a degree, you had other things you were in process of doing. You can't interrupt that every year and a half,
Yeah, right.
and then expect to pick up right where you left off. That's impossible. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, to your point, the World War II folks, you figure back then they might have done 2 years or so between training the tour, maybe longer, maybe some of them on the high end I had the pleasure of interviewing Sam Baker, the World War II veteran. He was at the tail end, so he wound up doing a full like 3 years of active duty. You had some people that could do that, come home,
Yeah,
go to the
exactly.
factory. Back then, it was an industrial revolution, right? You had all sorts of jobs where you're doing manual labor, but you're also a little bit isolated, right? You're on a line assembly, or you're working construction. You're whacking a hammer. You're welding. You're doing something where your mind is really focused on a task. That's not exactly the economy we're in now for jobs. That's not exactly the majority of jobs, right? So the adjustment to that is a little bit different right off the bat. But to your point, they didn't have any commitment back to the military. They were done, right? And when you don't have that cloud hanging on you, where you don't know if a month later you're going to have to go back overseas, you can focus a little bit better on your career or your school. A lot of World War II veterans went back to college and became engineers, mathematicians. A lot of the developments that came out from even the tech sector that we enjoy now, the internet and all that stuff came from a lot of World War II vets that didn't have to go back to fight. They could just focus on something, and they did incredible work. So, our generation kind of, you know, it's like I still remember that iconic cartoon that was on, I don't know, some national newspaper when I was overseas. This is 04, 05, and it was a picture of a long airplane, and there was troops coming off. They were coming home, and it said "Welcome home." There's like a big parade of people with a welcome home flag, and the Iraq and Afghanistan vets are getting off the plane, and then there's a circle of them going through the welcome home group, right? And then getting right back on the same plane at the front of the plane, saying, good luck, see you soon. And it's so in my head because I remember that's exactly what's happening, you know.
Well, you know what's crazy is like I remember the deployments very vividly. I don't remember the time in between the deployments.
Right, right.
Like it's almost like it didn't exist.
It's a blur, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit of a reprieve, but you don't really necessarily remember that. It's like taking a breath and then you remember what happened afterwards. So yeah. So it's a brutal combat plan there from the DoD on some of those things, but it is what it is. It was what it was, and hopefully we can all learn from it. So, and this is why folks like you are doing good work beyond healing your own process of the stories, helping your fellow vets get their stories in there. It's beyond that. A civilian who's listening right now might know nothing about the military. Maybe this is the first time they heard the show, the story. They're going to pick up a copy of your book, and they're gonna be able to read this and actually have an appreciation and an understanding of what all of your fellow troops went through to serve their country. And this was as volunteers. This is something I'm very passionate about reminding people. We still have volunteers that we need to be really, really grateful for. World War II, 1 out of 4 households had someone in the service. Vietnam, 1 out of 10 Americans were part of that war. And that was with a draft. Both of those were with a draft. Our era of training before 9/11, you and I joining in the 90s, 1%. Post 9/11, a little bit of a spike, a little bit of a bump. People were patriotic and felt their nation called them. I'm always incredibly impressed with the young veterans I've had on the show that joined after 9/11. Incredible stories there. But then it fizzled, right? And now we're less than half of 1% of our nation's population being in the military. All you have to do is ask yourself if you can defend 99.95, you know what I mean? Like it's not enough. It's
Yeah.
not a strong enough military. And I think part of that is, well, there's a number of factors, but I think a big part of it is simply because we've gone from families and neighborhoods that knew someone in the service to now we're 1 out of 100 or less. So there's a disconnect. There's a miscommunication of what it's like to be in the service. That's why I enjoyed doing this show. We have people from all different backgrounds, different branches, different MOSs, and people can learn about, wow, I didn't know you could be, uh, you know, a mechanic in the military, for example. I had someone that was a dentist in the military. There's a lot of folks that are like just now starting to understand the opportunities for the individual, but more importantly, the mission that has to happen for our country. We need people like yourself. We need people like the veterans you talk about in this book that are willing to give up part of their youth, right? Probably the best physical years of their life to be on that wall, to be on that post, to be in that striker, to be in that Humvee, to be in a tree, to be on a roof, to do what we have to do to make sure the rest of us can sleep at night. And I think books like yours is a great reminder of the sacrifice and what it takes to keep this country free. So I can't thank you enough for writing this book and sharing these stories.
It's my pleasure. Trust me. Yeah, it's good. I like to give a voice to the people who can't give a voice to themselves.
Yep.
people who won't advocate for themselves, who won't say, because let's be honest, those were some heroes that are in that book,
Yeah,
but they
absolutely.
will never call themselves heroes.
Right.
It's not heroic. I was just doing my job. That's the one common theme that you hear from all the people that I was with over there.
You know,
We just did our job. We didn't do anything heroic. No, you did, bro. And I'm all right about it.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I want to ask you, I mean, with all the experience you had, and I know you had obviously an awesome commander there, but with all the leaders, and of course you were a leader too, right? So, we all start here, right?
Right.
But you have such a unique experience compared to most because you did have multiple tours. So it's not fair to say what's the one thing. I don't want to say that to you, but was there perhaps a theme that came out of lessons learned, either by individual leaders that taught you something or something you tried to teach your team members? Was there one lesson or leader that kind of gave you something that was like an anchor of like, hey, you know what? This is something that even now, years later, impacts the way I process life. Like this is a life lesson. Anything like that that kind of sticks out in your mind?
When I was a young E5, there's no like manual that tells you how to be a leader. You emulate the people that are around you. And this guy that I was with when I first got to Blackhawk Company, Sergeant Major retired Wallmeyer. He he looked at me and he was like, Joe, he's like, you look a little stressed out. Let me tell you something. Just take care of the men and the rest will follow. If you take care of them, they're going to take care of you. And that was absolutely 100% true, not only there, but everywhere else I went in the military. I had 10 years plus of platoon sergeant experience, and I did things a little differently because I just took care of the guys, and the rest they were like, why do you always get all the special missions and you always get everything? You're always so much better than everybody else. I'm not better than everybody else. I just take care of these dudes and
Take
they take
care of,
care of me.
yeah, take care of the team. Yeah, that's
So
fantastic.
I would say that was definitely the single thing that stood out in my mind early, that someone sat me down and like I said, they just take care of the guys.
Yeah.
Take care of the guys, they'll take care of you.
Yeah, that's great. And that transcends into post service as well. I mean, I see that in business. And if you look at any of the big companies, like the really big ones that still have a culture, which is tough to do post pandemic, the ones that have it is because they took care of their people, during what was essentially their version of a tour, right? The pandemic was about as most complicated of a way to run a business that they had ever had in their lifetime. And the ones that treated their people with respect and made sure they were taken care of are the ones that got rewarded later. And the ones that didn't fell apart. You know, it was in my day job, there's this term that we used a couple years ago called for the economy that it was a K-shaped recovery. Everything stopped, right? The world stopped for a bit there in 2020. And then as things recovered, some went straight up and some went straight down, making the letter K. But
Okay.
universally, if you look at the ones that came out of that, it's because they said, you know what, customers are great. That's how we pay the bills. But if we don't take care of our people, we have no business. So that's a lesson from the military that everyone can learn from. What you just said is what I hope all listeners take to heart in whatever organization they're with, because that's true. You take care of your people and they'll take care of you. That's fantastic. So, well, that's great. Well, tell me about your day to day now. I mean, are you now that the book's published? I appreciate your time, obviously, talking about it. But I mean, is there perhaps it was your first book? Which, by the way, if you didn't tell me that, I would never have guessed that in a million years. I would have thought you were writing for decades here, the way you wrote this. But is there maybe another project you might consider working on in the future, or do you?
I've actually started on my second book.
There you
So
go. Awesome.
it's going to be called The Kings of Battle, Blood and Steel. It's
Okay.
about Mosul, my deployment to Mosul in 0709. So in 0709, I was the targeting NCO for all of northern Iraq. So we put a hurting on some Al Qaeda in northern Iraq. But more than that, it's a bigger project. This one's going to take me a little longer because
Sure.
it's about the entire 3rd ACR, 3-3 ACR in Mosul for
Sure.
15 months during the surge. So
Sure.
it's a little bit more to take on. I think probably 12 to 18 months is going to take me to do the research and the writing for all of this. So, but that's what I work on. These days I do a little bit. You can see my board behind me. I have my list of things for the chapters and everything
Yeah, I
else.
love that.
How I have to break it down. So I write the outline for everything first and then kind of fill in the gaps from there.
Yep.
So that's what I do all day.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that too. We'll have to do a revisit and have another catch up with each other when that book's getting ready to launch. And we like to support you. That's what the listeners of the show are fantastic. We hear from them every week. We actually have obviously people comment online and the email, and that's great. And folks, if you're doing that, we love that too. But it's always fun to get a phone call. We actually have a phone. Remember phones? So and I always broadcast the number during the air and we put it online. So we get some wonderful calls during the week. And a lot of them are not veterans. They're just people who randomly heard it on the station. We're syndicated now, so we're in different towns. I hear from people every week in towns I may not be too familiar with or haven't been to. And I'm sure that will happen this week after this conversation. They'll just say, "Oh, what a wonderful! I never knew this." They love telling me something they learned, and I love that. That's a reward to me. That's my personal. This isn't a job for me. I volunteer, but that's one of my rewards. I get to talk to a fellow veteran, and then I get to hear from someone where like, it really hit. Somebody got something out of it to the point where they picked up a phone, which today's youth they think phones are like weights. They're like 100 pounds. They don't know how to do it. The little app on your phone that says phone is not just an app. You can actually connect with people. So they call and they typically compliment the guest. So that that's what I know will come out of this conversation too. We'll have some wonderful people that appreciate your work. And again, folks, you want to pick up a copy of it. The title of Joe's book is Gods of War. It's easily found on Amazon, or you can find it under his biography on our website as well. Just go ahead and pick up a couple copies. And it's the Legend of Blackhawk Company, first of the 23rd Infantry. And Joe, I can't thank you enough for that, but I do have one more question if you got a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
I always enjoy the topic of time travel. It's just something I don't know. We'll blame it on Back to the Future or something. I don't know, but if you with everything you've experienced now, if you had a minute to be able to go back in time, and the only thing you could do with that minute is to talk to your younger self, maybe before he got that traffic ticket. Or maybe right afterwards. But if you knew how this was going to play out and all the journeys you took on and the work you're doing now, what would be that conversation with your younger self if you just had a minute or less?
I'd tell myself to shut my mouth and do everything I was told when I was younger, and take advantage of every single opportunity to go to school. I mean, I was a bit of not a good soldier when I was younger at first. It took me a while to conform to the military. Physically, I never had a problem with anything. It was the mental aspect of doing what I was told that I struggled with early. So I would definitely tell myself to just shut my mouth and do what I was told.
Yeah, it's a bit of a learning curve. I remember even basic training, I remember very well. I was somewhat willing to take orders without pushing back, but I had a battle buddy that was hell bent on seeing how many times we could get smoked in a day.
Yeah, I did a lot of push-ups when I was younger. A lot of push-ups. I could not figure I couldn't figure it out. I could not keep my mouth from stop talking.
Yeah, yeah.
Spent that first tour to Korea. I think I spent the entire tour in Korea in the front lean and rest. I'm pretty sure I did.
Hey, you know what? You got better muscles for it. It worked out. You ever track that cop down? They gave you a ticket and send him a
I
thank you
did
note?
not. You know what though? That actually worked out because
Yeah,
I think if I would have went in the National Guard, it would have been different. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yep.
You can always say what if, but you know what? Everything kind of turned out well. I had great opportunities in the military. I got to meet great people. I got to be part of something, that never happened before in the Striker Brigade. I am very, very thankful for my time in the military. And I feel like I got as much out of it as I put into it,
Yeah.
and I still have those relationships to this day to people that I met along the way. In all of the stops that I met along the way, I have people that I still talk to.
Same here. I can remember I went to basic training, and you know how that goes. Basic training, AIT, you're gone 6, 7 months, something like that, and you get back to the normal life where you can watch TV and do things. And remember that show Friends?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was new to me. I don't remember what year that came out, and I don't think I even watched new ones. It might have already been repeating. Whatever the case is, I just remember that one of the things I flipped the channel on, like the first day I was home and had a normal life, um, was a show Friends. And I think about that because it's kind of funny to me now because being in the military, like you just said, I have lifelong friends, and I know we've the GWAT veterans have made the kind of a casual joke about uh, trauma bonded friendships, right? We experience so much trauma together that we have to be friends for life regardless. But the reality is, I have such strong friendships that I can't possibly. We have the luxury and the level of friendships that I really don't think people outside the military will ever have. And I think about that show, Friends. I remember thinking what a silly show that was. And I'm not picking on it. I'm just saying that when I was gone for several months of no TV, it seemed like a silly show when I first turned it on. And I always put in my head, like, that's what I think other people think friendships are.
I
And
mean,
I don't think they'll
outside,
ever know what people in the military know as far as like when your job and your roommate is all tied into the same thing and it's life and death and you know that there's a such a level of trust and loyalty that's almost impossible to explain to people. And it doesn't go away when you come home. It just doesn't.
but I mean, you spend so much time, even not at war, you spend
Right.
so much time in training, and every single day you're with these guys from 06 to 1700 on a normal duty day. You just have that that familiarity, that bond and comfortability that you gain with these people.
Yep.
And I mean, like I said, even before I went to war, I still have friends from the time before I went to war, that got out of the military or whatever, and we're still friends because you do spend a lot of time with somebody. You spend more time with them than you do with your family.
Yeah. And I think people not familiar with the military would be surprised to know that it's not like we're all just tough and having push-up competitions with each other or picking on each other. It's not even. I mean, obviously that's all kind of part of the culture to some degree, but I think being in the military gave me more empathy towards understanding people than anything I could have done with my life because, like you said, you're with them from dark 30 till lights out. You know everything about them. You know they got that letter from home, and you know why they're in a bad mood, or you know what I mean. Like you appreciate everyone. You got people from different backgrounds, different religions, different everything. And I don't think I could have experienced that in any other way possibly in my life. So you mature much quicker. If you're open to learning, you can absorb more of people's backgrounds, and you have sympathy for what people go through, and you start to understand over time, and that makes you a better everything, right?
Yeah.
Makes you a better leader, makes you a better follower, makes you a better friend, and I think this is another passion of mine is trying to explain to employers out there that maybe don't have a focus on trying to recruit veterans. You want, you need folks like yourself that have that experience as you had the hard skill sets and the soft skill and you're trainable as all heck. I mean, there's nothing any employer has that can't be taught to a veteran.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
you go from a lazy teenager to a fighting machine that knows regulations by heart in 7 weeks. You don't think we can read an HR manual and
Yeah.
figure out
Right.
what the copier is?
Exactly.
Well, this was a great talk, Joe. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And folks, again, I've been sitting here talking to Army veteran Joe Troutman, and the author of a fantastic book. You're going to want to pick up a couple copies today. It's called Gods of War. Last name Troutman, Troutman. And again, if you can't find it online or you're on Amazon, you missed it somehow, just go to the LimaCharlieShow.com, look at Joe's bio, and right there is a link. And please pick up a couple copies and follow his path. And you can actually follow him as an author on Amazon, which I did myself after I picked up my copy. So when he launches his new book, you'll get a little, a little bell, a little reminder. So please do that. And Joe, just thanks again. This was awesome. I really appreciate the time.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yep. God bless and go Army. Yeah.